Now, if you add on to that, this notion of housing policy in the United States, the fact that it's part of the American dream to own a home, an American dream that's been encouraged by every president since FDR, since the 1930s. Whole institutions were created in the United States to help Americans achieve the American dream at whatever cost was necessary, including subsidizing their mortgages, encouraging banks to lend money even to people who the banks themselves knew couldn't pay the money back, but in order to gain political capital, if you will, to gain political favors, they did it anyway because they were, they were asked to, and in some cases required to by legislation. Freddie and Fannie, which was subsidizing Freddie Mac, and Fannie Mae, which was subsidizing mortgages. And it's just a bully pulpit. President Bush in 2003 was in Atlanta telling everybody that housing was the American dream, and his administration would make sure that everybody who wanted a house could buy a house in America. And indeed, home ownership in the U.S. went from 65% to 70% in a very short period of time. Because anybody could get a subsidized mortgage at very low rates. The banks weren't asking for anything in terms of documentation. Prices were going up because, the classic asset bubble, the Fed was printing money, the money was going into home prices, prices were going up, everybody felt great until interest rates started going up again. So the cause of this crisis, not only do we not have a free market, not only it cannot be capitalism because there wasn't capitalism, but if you look at the elements within our mixed economy that caused this crisis, the elements clearly that cause the crisis are the governmental elements. The elements of the regulatory state, the elements of central banking and all the various regulations in the U.S. over the banking industry and over housing policy. I don't think that anybody looking at the data honestly can come to any other conclusion. So to me, the more interesting question, rather than what caused this crisis, to me the more interesting question is why, as a culture, in the U.S. and certainly in Europe, why are we so eager to blame capitalism for our problems? Why are we so eager to blame the bankers? I think every single financial or economic crisis in the last 1,000 years has been blamed on bankers. I think the only difference is in the old days, they used to blame it on Jewish bankers, now they dropped the Jewish, because it's not politically correct anymore to blame it on Jews. So, but it's the bankers. The bankers have always been at fault somehow on these crises. Why is it that we're so eager, so enthusiastic almost? You can see it. You can see the commentators on TV that they're foaming. They're so excited about this wonderful opportunity to go after capitalism, and people support it. In America, if you followed the elections, the recent election, Obama and McCain competed with one another. Who could be the most aggressive candidate to blame the financial crisis on Wall Street, on capitalism, on the banks? There was no free market, pro-banking, pro-market candidate in the U.S. this last election. Obama won out because he was more effective in blaming the crisis. And, because, and to a large extent, because he was not Bush and wasn't associated with Bush in any way as McCain was. And, on one hand, he's charismatic. He doesn't say much, but he says it with passion. What he doesn't say, he says with passion. In an engaging kind of way. And the truth is that Americans truly did want change. And to some extent, they didn't care what change it was. So why is it? Why are we so eager to blame capitalism? And I think this is really where Ayn Rand, and I'm just curious, show of hands, how many of you have read something by Ayn Rand? It's almost this is Ayn Rand's real, I think, innovation, is in identifying the cultural, philosophical, moral roots of the antagonism towards capitalism. Why is it that people are so eager to blame business, to blame capitalism, to blame the bankers? And I think the reason is that capitalism is inherently selfish. people under capitalism are pursuing their own self-interest. A businessman can hide behind the mantra of what they do benefits society and everybody's better off if they make a lot of money. But bottom line is when they get up in the morning and go to work, they're going to work to make money. For whom? For themselves. For their shareholders. Capitalists, everybody really under capitalism is in it for themselves. The workers are going to work because they enjoy the work, because they get paid for the work, because they get paid for it, so that they can take care of themselves and their family. Very few people get up in the morning and say, oh joy, I'm going to go to work so the world can be a better place. That's just not how capitalists function. They go to work because they love it, because it's fun, it's exciting. They go to work because they want to make a lot of money. They go to work because it's the way they fulfill their lives. You know, Steve Jobs, I like to use my iPhone because I like to show it off, and it's one of the coolest devices I think ever made. Steve Jobs didn't make this in order to make the world a better place. He made this to make Apple a more profitable, successful company. He made this because he had a passion for beautiful, effective, efficient products. He made this because he believed in it. He believed in it. He wanted to see the manifestation in reality of a product of his imagination or his engineer's imagination. It was all about him and Apple. And that's what motivates capitalists. But more than just the capitalists, i.e. providers of capital. That's what motivates most people within a capitalist economy. And I think, bottom line, most people are pretty selfish most of the time. I used to have my students, when I taught, I used to ask my students, how many of you, before you decided what to major in at university, made a list of all the different professions you could do, and then ranked them based on their social, what would maximize social utility, and then chose that profession that would maximize social utility. And usually there'd be one poor soul in the back who raised his hand. And then I'd ask them, well, how many of you chose your profession based on what interested you? Based on what you wanted to do with your life? Based on what you thought would be the most fun, the most money, the most interesting, whatever. But about your values. And of course, everybody raises their hands at that. Because most people, most successful people, function to try to benefit their own lives as much as they can. And yet, when I say capitalism is selfish, that people under capitalism behave in a self-interested way, even you guys are kind of squirming in your seats. That's kind of an uncomfortable thing to say.